All right, looks like we've got everybody. Hello and welcome to Code Red for Humanity, Pathways to Healthy Electric Cities. My name is Lauren Weston. I'm the Executive Director for Actera Action for a Healthy Planet. Thank you so much for participating in this event. It's very important to acknowledge the severe weather many of us have been experiencing these last few weeks. The hosts and partners for this event are extremely grateful to you for holding space for us this evening and with us this evening. And we wish you all safety and rest in the coming days. Also want to acknowledge what a place it is to be in both a state of drought and flood in California, which I know some of you can resonate deeply with based on the work that you do every day. Also, none of us can rightfully do our work without acknowledging the land on which we sit. I respectfully acknowledge that my work takes place on the ancestral and unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone and or the Yukuts. Please, if you feel so inclined, share that with other folks too, where you might be calling in from or enjoying this evening with us from. It's important to acknowledge that land, the unceded land we're on. I'll now introduce our MC for the event, Maya Prakash. Maya is a junior at Gunn High School and a member of the Palo Alto Student Climate Coalition. She works with the City Council in Palo Alto and other youth climate peers to further climate and sustainability progress with a focus on education and electrification. Again, thank you all, and Maya, take it away.
Thank you, Lauren. Let's get started. Thank you all for being from here, and we wanted to start with 2 quick polls to find out where everyone is from and who you are. So we'll launch those now. Great. Well, feel free to take a look and see who is here today. Thank you for joining other attendees in answering our first 2 poll questions. Whoever you are and wherever you live, we are all in this together, and Mother Nature continues to alert everyone across the planet that we are in a climate emergency. Our goal today is to provide you with some tools that you can use to enact climate solutions in your city and county. Our audience consists of elected city and county leaders, municipal staff, climate advocates, and concerned community members. We scheduled this event to be held in early January in order to get in front of municipal leaders prior to their goal-setting meetings. Last year was a good year for REACH codes, as many local governments, 90 across the nation with more than 70 of those in California, adopted ordinances that restrict or in many cases completely prohibit the use of fossil fuel gases in new building construction. But 2023 needs to be the year that local governments prioritize enacting policies and programs that address existing buildings. Achieving our climate goals and staying below the Paris Agreement threshold of 2 degrees Celsius and ideally below 1.5 degrees of warming will be mathematically impossible unless we urgently remove gas equipment from our existing homes and buildings. Time is running out. Thankfully, more and more people and government institutions are realizing this and are taking action. And thankfully, we have some wonderful speakers with us here today to share some strategies and stories. We'll hear from them about the many tools that were made available to us last year to address some of the challenges relating to funding, policy, and outreach. They will also discuss the health benefits of electrifying our buildings as it relates to both indoor and outdoor air pollution. And all of them will stress the importance of equity and justice because, as I mentioned, we are all in this together. Nobody can be left behind, and everyone must benefit. The speaking portion of our event will cover 90 minutes, and we'll follow that with a 30-minute Q&A to answer your questions. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we strongly encourage your questions. Although we won't be able to answer everything today, your questions will help us shape future events where your questions can be fully addressed and discussed. Also, feel free to upvote questions that you'd most like to hear answered by clicking on the thumbs up button below those questions. This event is being recorded and will be made available on Actera's website in the coming days. Registrants will also receive an email with links to the video recording and additional resources recommended by the speakers and organizers. They will also receive a registration link for the January 21st workshop, which aims to build off of topics explored today in an interactive setting, perfect for political offices, experienced climate activists, and anyone who wants to get involved. Thank you again to the many elected officials and staff in attendance from cities and counties across the Bay Area and beyond. We're so glad you're here. Actera, 350 Silicon Valley, and the Climate Action Leadership Team are honored to host this event, and we recognize and thank our 45 co-sponsors who have assisted in publicizing and promoting it. We welcome you on this journey and hope that you will leave this event with a greater understanding of the new tools that are available to address our climate crisis. And most importantly, we hope you will be inspired, encouraged, and emboldened to implement these solutions in your community in an equitable and just manner. Admittedly, decarbonizing our existing buildings will not solve climate change, but a significant percentage of a city's greenhouse gas emissions are emitted from our buildings. This is an area that local governments are uniquely positioned to impact, and what your city does can influence what other cities do, what the state does, and ultimately what the nation and other countries across the world do to address this issue. It's a global effort that truly can be accelerated locally. Our first speaker, Panama Bartholomy, is an executive director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, which unites policymakers, building industry stakeholders, advocates, and consumers in the effort to move buildings off fossil fuels. Their programs and initiatives help reduce pollution, improve public health, and lower energy bills for millions of Americans. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bartholomy to give us an insightful overview of building emissions, the many problems with methane, the importance of acting with urgency, and areas that are primed for local action. Panama, thank you for being here, and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Maya. You promised that I'd be insightful, so we'll see. I'll try to live up to your precedent that you gave me. And great job on emceeing this. I really appreciate it. I want to say, first of all, just thank you to the sponsors of this. This is an incredibly timely session, and you put together just a wonderful panel that I'm honored to be a part of. And so you folks are in for a real treat tonight. You have international leaders on this panel. You have local leaders on this panel. It's going to be a fantastic night that'll hopefully set the platform for a lot of fantastic action at the local level around the Bay Area. The Bay Area is the home and the heart of the building decarbonization movement in this world. And so we look to you for your leadership you provided, and we look to you for your leadership you're going to provide moving forward. I was asked today to come and cover everything and set up a platform for the rest of the conversation. Why should we be getting off gas? What's the story with climate change and gas? And what are the opportunities? What's happening? And what should everybody do? So I'll do that in about 12 minutes. And I'm just very honored to be speaking to this group. I tried to find the scariest picture of gas that I could possibly find. And this looked like it was about it, the scariest slide. I'm going to spend some time. My organization, the Building Decarbonization Coalition, is a nonprofit that unites utilities, manufacturers of heating equipment, the design and construction community, local government agencies and state government agencies and nonprofits to try to find solutions to eliminate pollution from buildings. And we do that through encouraging the electrification of buildings and getting off of gas. And so to do that, you have to draw some distinctions about, what's so wrong with gas. And so please just allow me to walk through some of the issues that we face here in California and across the country with our dependency on gas. So largely, we're talking about four main appliances when we talk about electrification of buildings or the decarbonization of buildings. how you heat your space, how you heat your water, how you heat your food, and how you heat your clothes. Together, depending on your climate zone, that makes up about 90 to 95% of the gas use in your building. Things like gas fireplaces or pools make up 1 to 2%. And your furnace and your water heater really generally make up around 90% of all of the gas use in the building. But I would say, I don't know about your algorithm, but my algorithm is all about gas stoves this week. And so while the majority of gas use is over on the space heating and water heating, a majority of the emotion and the conversation always seem to revolve around the gas stove and the oven. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges that we face here in California is our air quality. We have 5 of the worst air quality basins in the whole country here in California and our major metropolitan areas. And ozone and PM 2.5 are some of the main contributors to our air quality problems. And nitrous oxides, or NOx, is one of the major precursors of ozone. And so if we're going to address our air quality problems, we have to address the places where we're emitting NOx within our economy and our communities. And so we've done a big job over the past 50 years through the leadership of the California Air Resources Board and local air districts to reduce emissions from power plants and cars. Unfortunately, we haven't had that same kind of leadership on buildings and the burning of gas in buildings. And so what we have now is a situation where, because we've had so much leadership on power plants and cars, we have much more efficient power generation and transportation, but the buildings are now playing an outsized role of pollution for our local communities. Twice as much, nearly twice as much as all of the combined emissions coming from power plants and cars are being emitted by our buildings. To drill down deeper on the Bay Area, here's a series of bubbles that you can relate to, but it's the air basins and the air quality management districts across California. I've circled the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which provides air quality regulation for the 9 counties of the Bay Area, and looking at the nitrogen oxides being emitted from buildings on the left side of the screen. Oh, sorry, go back one. Buildings on the left side of the screen and cars on the right side of the screen, you can see that buildings in the Bay Area and the burning of gas in buildings produces just under 3 times more ozone and air quality pollutants than all of the cars driving all over the Bay Area. And so if we're going to get a handle on our air quality problems in the Bay Area and across California, we're going to have to get a handle on the burning of gas within our buildings. As I said, my algorithm this week is giving me just all stories about stoves. We finally reached the mainstream when you have Tucker Carlson, AOC, and Ted Cruz all arguing about gas stoves on social media. But there is a growing body of evidence, not just this year, not just last year, but over the last 40 years, about the dangers of cooking with gas, particularly in poorly or unventilated areas, for respiratory health. The reality is that when you combust gas, you produce carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and formaldehyde. And if you are doing it in a poorly ventilated or unventilated area, that can cause significant problems for your respiratory system. And people with already existing respiratory problems, such as asthma, can be in a very bad situation when exposed to these sorts of pollutants. Next slide. Unfortunately, just a massive amount of research going on right now, finding that even when we turn stoves off, we may not be safe from the gas stoves. A study out of Stanford last year found that these gas stoves will be leaking even when turned off, exposing us to a number of chemicals, including benzene, which is a dangerous carcinogen that, for some reason, here in California, we have a higher proportion of benzene in our natural gas than any other part of the country. And the Stanford study found alarming levels of leakage of benzene coming out of gas stoves, even when turned off. And so we have a growing body of evidence that's starting to lead us to, maybe we shouldn't be having open flames in our homes in order to be able to cook our food. Next slide, please. One of the kind of unknown mysteries of natural gas here in California is we actually don't produce a lot of the natural gas that we use. We import nearly 85% of all of the natural gas here into California to do for power generation, for industrial uses, and for our buildings. And what this exposes us to is what is an increasingly global market for natural gas. Next slide, please. An increasingly global market for natural gas that is starting to have a much larger impact of global events on the availability of that gas, as well as then the price of that gas. And so in California, for those of you that are already getting your PG&E bills for January, or if you're getting them in February, you're going to be noticing a very large increase in your bill. This is a number of factors, but in large part, the cold snap in the rest of the country, the war in Ukraine, America's decision to ship a lot of our natural gas over to Europe to help them get off of Russian gas. We're starting to be influenced by global events beyond our control, and we're going to start to pay the costs of that. Southern California Gas Company just sent out a note to all of their customers saying you're going to be experiencing, quote, shockingly high, unquote, bills coming from us over the next few months. If you had a bill of $130 last year for January, you can expect a bill of about $350 for January of this year. And so because we don't produce a lot of our own natural gas, we're increasingly being exposed to the vagaries of this now international commodity. Next slide, please. And the issue really is, how do we get off of gas? And the challenge for utilities is that utilities selling this global commodity don't really make their money off of selling gas. Utilities make their money off of building the infrastructure to be able to get the gas to you. 90% of the revenue that a utility receives for gas comes from the building sector, even though buildings only use 30% of the gas in America. And that's because they have built out a vast distribution and transmission network to be able to get gas to all of the buildings. And that's what they then take out financing for and are repaid for ratepayers for. They pass through the cost of the gas, of the commodity, to all of us. But what they're getting a real return on investment for is the infrastructure that they lay. And every new pipe that they're laying in our communities right now has a 60 to 80 year expected life. And so every new community that you're approving to build within your community that has natural gas in it, we're putting stranded assets, what is known stranded assets in the ground that we'll have to be paying off as ratepayers long after we've been able to shut that system down, but we'll still be paying for the cost of. Next slide, please. From a climate change perspective, natural gas is playing an increasing role of driving greenhouse gas emissions. As the world has been attempting to move off of coal and as emissions from vehicles have been getting better, we become more dependent on natural gas. And natural gas, the extraction and the use of natural gas is now become the biggest driver of emissions globally, and the one that we have to address, both from a methane perspective, coming from the extraction of gas and the release, as well as from the actual use of gas from the end uses. Next slide, please. Bringing that closer to the Bay Area, the burning of gas and the use of electricity in buildings is one of the main areas of greenhouse gas emissions from all of your communities. Usually, depending on your community, I just put 4 up here as an example, transportation is going to be your largest emitter, and then buildings will usually follow close behind with some other various end uses, depending upon your community and some of the industries within your community. The truth is that buildings are one of the few areas where local governments can have a really powerful impact on climate change. Of course, we want you to be doing everything you can to be bringing about good land use, to be able to reduce vehicle miles traveled. But the reality is that land use changes take a long time to get done and a long time to have impact. And as local elected officials You don't have a lot of power over the vehicles that are bought within your community or the fuel that's used to power those vehicles. Buildings are an area where you have a lot of power, and is an area where you can be adopting policies and working on programs and partnering with organizations to be able to bring about significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And I would posit that it's an area of it should be an area of extreme focus for you in your climate change activities for the rest of this decade. Next slide, please. So the movement for building decarbonization, and Donnell may disagree with me on this one, but the movement, I think, very much kicked off in 2019 with Berkeley's adoption of a ban on natural gas in new buildings, the first city to do so. Next slide, please. And I thought one of the very interesting things at that meeting was the fourth speaker, Mr. Darren Klein of Pacific Gas and Electric, who got up, and there was kind of a hush in the room when they wondered, what is PG&E, the supplier of gas to Berkeley, going to say here to the city council who's considering banning gas in all new construction? And Darren got up and he said, PG&E is here to support Berkeley and any other city that wants to help us stop the expansion of our gas network across our territory. We know that an expanding gas network doesn't have a role to play in California's climate future, and we don't believe that our customers would be able to afford an expanding gas system. There was an uproarious cheer across the room from the audience during his testimony. Next slide, please. Since then, PG&E has become a real outspoken opponent of the expansion of gas into new construction and calling for the need to be able to get existing buildings existing neighborhoods as their preference, completely off of gas. And so I would just ask you, if your dealer is telling you, hey man, you got to stop using this stuff, it's not good for you, you should listen to your dealer if they don't want to be selling you the very product that you've been buying from them, and really trust them, you should be getting off of it. Next slide, please. This is the picture of leadership. Following Berkeley, dozens of cities across California started to adopt local reach codes calling for the discouragement or the absolute banning of gas in new construction. This is really where the movement went from, no offense, a good idea in Berkeley to spreading to mainstream adoption across not only California, but across the country. And I just have to take a moment to applaud and thank all the elected leaders on this call and all of the activists and the city staff that worked so hard in all these jurisdictions to not only adopt this for your community, but to set an example for the rest of the country that is now sweeping across jurisdictions across this country. Next slide, please. And we're seeing it happen in areas where you would think, on the West Coast, this is a map of all of the adopted in red and all of the proposed gas bans at the local level across this country, but also in unexpected areas, such as in Miami or such as in the state of Kansas. You're starting to see adoption spread at the local level across this country. Next slide, please. And the good news is that the home builders of California generally think that this is inevitable and this is going to be okay. In 2018, they released the study that you see on the slide that found that electric appliances have a similar or lower cost than natural gas appliances. And so for new construction, you're not looking at a cost premium, according to the California Building Industry Association, to be building all electric for new construction. And so I think that's helped a number of local jurisdictions have the confidence to be able to move forward with adopting these reach codes. And that adoption across jurisdictions, across not only the Bay Area, but now Los Angeles and San Diego will adopt in the first quarter of this year, really gave confidence to the California Energy Commission to be able to move forward and adopt a strong code statewide. And so in California, leadership generally happens at the local level, and is then emulated at the state level, and then that flows to the rest of the country moving forward. It's part of our California exceptionalism that we like to brag about, whether it's real or not, but it always comes from the local level first, and it has for building electrification, absolutely. Next slide, please. Now is the time, though, to be moving away from new construction. Now that we've won, now that we're winning there, and we're having adoption of policies there, and moving into existing buildings. And we need to be looking at opportunities as we start to replace gas appliances over the next decade and a half, and looking for opportunities to replace those with electric appliances and put in place programs that can get out in front of replacement, so that we're actually having turnover of appliances in line with our climate goals and our climate timelines. And so we have leadership happening in California right now at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which is proposing a policy that would ban the sale of gas heaters and gas water heaters starting as early as 2027, depending on market conditions. And then at the state level, the California Air Board saying that as of 2030, they're going to adopt a ban on the sale of gas water heaters and gas furnaces statewide. This is global leadership happening. And I will just say that we have a lot of work to do to be able to build out the market and the systems and to get the policies right in order to be able to help us be able to meet these targets. And it's going to be critical for local elected officials to be working within your communities to get your communities ready to be able to respond to this. Next slide, please. One of the best ways to do this is adopting local policies around existing buildings, similar to what the city of San Mateo has adopted. In between now and 2030, California is going to replace half of all of the air conditioners in the state. And so in 2030, we're going to say that, you're going to have to be putting in heat pumps when you replace your furnace. But in between now and then, we're going to replace half of all of the air conditioners. The city of San Mateo has adopted a policy that says when you replace your air conditioner or when you replace your water heater, you're going to have to do that with heat pumps. These are the kind of policies that we're going to need on existing buildings moving forward to make sure that we're actually in line with the timeframes we have for clean air and climate change alignment of 2030 and 2045 carbon neutrality, depending on your city. Next slide, please. I'll finish up by just talking about some of the dangers if we don't do electrification right. We're all paying for the gas system as ratepayers. The gas companies invest in the gas system, and then they charge us in our rates to pay off the financing they got for that gas system. As more and more of our community members and more communities get off the gas system, that's less people to pay off the gas system. And so the gas companies will have to raise rates on the people that are left on the gas system in order to be able to make up for that lost revenue and lost throughput. Those higher rates will make electrification even more affordable to be able to take on. And as more and more people adopt climate policies at the local level, that'll push more people off of the gas grid. And you can start to see the beginning of a downward spiral for the gas industry in California. The danger is if we don't do this right, and if we don't do this carefully, what you have is you have the people left behind on an expensive gas grid are the people that are least able to be able to get off of it. People that can't afford the infrastructure upgrades in their home. Renters that don't have choices around electric appliances or around gas or electric appliances. Restaurants that have very low margins but use a lot of gas. And so as we look at our policies, we have to be focusing on these constituencies and be able to figure a way to help them first in this transition. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. And one more, and I'll end here by saying that here are my recommendations for you at the local level. Absolutely, if you have not adopted a local reach code on new construction, that should be the first. It's a no-brainer. There's no additional cost. And in many times, it's actually cheaper because of the savings from not putting in gas lines to that building. San Mateo has provided the perfect model ordinance for existing buildings, and I highly recommend any jurisdiction to adopt that. You're going to have to be educating your consumers and your installers working in your community about the coming changes in the market. The writing is on the wall from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the Air Board about phase outs that are coming. And you should be using resources like switcheson.org, a public education campaign, to be able to help educate consumers. And then working closely with installers in your community to be able to help them see the changes that are coming and the resources that are available to them to make the switch, such as the Inflation Reduction Act funds that are coming to be able to help them with that. And there's no better partner than your local CCAs in being able to help figure out plans at the local level. And then talking with PG&E about how to pilot community scale decarbonization within your community. I just want to thank you all. The people in this call, many of them started this movement, and you provided the model for how this movement is now rolling out around this country. It is now time to move to the next step of this movement, which is existing buildings. And so we're coming back to you again, saying, once again, we need your leadership to be able to provide the model that we can carry out to the rest of the country and finally get rid of pollution in all buildings. And so thank you for your leadership to this point, and look forward to supporting and applauding you on your future leadership as well.
Thank you, Panama. We really appreciate you sharing your broad knowledge and understanding of building emissions and effective decarbonization strategies. Our next speaker will discuss his company's approach to decarbonization. Baird is the founder and CEO of Block Power, a Brooklyn-based climate technology company that retrofits buildings, often in low-income neighborhoods, with electric heat pumps and other green tech to lower energy bills and reduce emissions. In 2022, Denel was featured on Time Magazine's 100 Next list that recognizes 100 rising stars from across industries and around the world. In 2021, he gave testimony to the U.S. Congressional Joint Economic Committee on the benefits of electric buildings and the federal government's role in supporting an equitable transition. Denel will discuss Block Power's various partnerships and how the company's mission promotes efficiency, equity, and workforce development. Denel, welcome and thank you. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with all of you, especially someone as talented as yourself. Really give us hope that we can get this done. And I'm a longtime admirer of Panama and his work convening and participating in what I agree with has been the Bay Area and California's leadership of the movement to ban gas in new buildings. But part of my role here tonight will be to push you guys even harder to focus on the 30% of US greenhouse gas emissions that comes from existing buildings that already exist. And they are frankly much harder to electrify than new buildings. When you're thinking about building a new building, you can get your architect and your engineer together and kind of design electrification into that building, particularly if you have a gas ban in place in your local community. But an existing building could be 20, 50, 100 years old, not designed to be decarbonized at all. And it takes a lot of work to get in there and retrofit and kind of work with the existing building's architecture and framework to redesign the building and figure out how to put in an all-electric energy system that moves that building off of fossil fuels when that building was designed to operate using fossil fuels. So it's a much, much, much more complicated problem. And I think a really important problem, since existing buildings do contribute 30% of emissions. That is what my tech company focuses on at Block Power. We are really honored to partner with Menlo Park, who's fortunate to have visionary leadership in the form of Mayor Nash, Angela and her colleagues in Menlo Park are just an amazing group of people, and really have inspired cities across the country and across the world to follow their lead. in implementing a commitment in Menlo Park to electrify and decarbonize thousands and thousands and thousands of buildings, existing buildings, by the year 2030. And the reason that I think this is so important is the climate crisis causes a significant amount of grief and anxiety and really confusion about where to start. There's a feeling of like powerlessness that a lot of us may have around what we can really do to impact the trajectory of a crisis of this scale, of this magnitude, when so many of our fellow Americans just have other priorities and aren't able to focus on climate. And the truth is, there's just a lot of confusion around where should we focus? Should we try to invent new technologies to scrape carbon from the sky? Yeah, we're gonna need to do some of that. Should we do like nuclear power to replace, fossil fuel and electricity grid? Maybe, and some people are gonna try to do some of that. It's really overwhelming when you think about where to start. But we think we should start with electrifying and greening existing buildings. It is shovel ready, it is actionable, it will create millions and millions of new jobs, American jobs that are high wage, that cannot be outsourced. And every new worker that we hire in this industry will become a climate advocate and will become someone who stays up late watching C-SPAN trying to figure out which senator needs to sign off to vote the climate bill through Congress. At Block Power, we've trained thousands of low-income New Yorkers on how to electrify buildings. These are folks who are ex-offenders. These are folks who aged out of foster care. These are folks who are homeless, who are really vulnerable New Yorkers. And we train them on how to install heat pumps and solar panels and community internet to stream data, on how to install electric vehicle charging stations. And these folks, even though they're low income and they may not have finished high school, they text us and say, hey, we're watching C-SPAN and trying to figure out what's going on with the climate bill, because now their job, their new career, and all of their certification, their whole future is tied up in the success of the climate movement. And that really politically expands the scope and scale and speed of the kind of movement that we can have as we fight this fight together to confront the climate crisis. So what Block Power wants to do is to take the best practices from Wall Street, from Silicon Valley, and the world of community organizing, which is the world that I come from. And we want to combine all of these best practices into persuading Americans to go building to building in their community and in their neighborhood and remove all the fossil fuels and electrify and decarbonize all of the buildings. And I believe that this is a specific, actionable thing that we as Americans can do right now to dramatically lead the world away from fossil fuels and demonstrate how to intervene in this climate disaster that we're all facing. So American cities can lead the way in going building to building and decarbonizing existing buildings and electrifying existing buildings while creating jobs and showing cities, not only here in America, but across the world, what's possible. I was a senior staffer on the Obama campaign. When I joined the campaign, I did not believe that Barack Obama could be elected president. I thought that at best, he could be elected vice president to Hillary. If we were lucky and we won South Carolina, maybe Hillary would pick him as her vice president. And if she won, then he'd be vice president and maybe the country would get used to it. I didn't think it was possible. Clearly I was wrong. Once we won Iowa, it became clear to everyone that it indeed was possible for America to elect its first Black president. And that's exactly what our generation came together and did, something that most of us thought was impossible. So sometimes it feels impossible to confront the climate crisis, but it is possible. And the way that I believe we can do it is by bringing neighbors together and having conversations in our communities about how to electrify and decarbonize buildings in our communities. And for the elected officials on the call, it's nothing more complicated than a get out the vote campaign, where we identify the buildings in your community or in your district that are most in need of electrification and decarbonization, most likely to benefit from electrification and decarbonization. We reach out and talk to those homeowners and building owners and residents of those buildings. We prioritize them. We collect information from them. We put it into the database, and then we send out construction crews to implement the electrification changes and renovations that are going to make their homes healthier, more affordable, safer, obviously better for the planet, but also reduce the amount of benzene and nitrogen dioxide and methane that kids are breathing in their homes. And what parent doesn't actually want to do that once they understand what their kids are breathing in? And so we think that Menlo Park and Palo Alto and Oakland and San Jose and San Mateo and all of the amazing cities in the Valley can and should lead the world on reducing 30% of your emissions from your buildings. God knows you guys have the technology and the resources and the affluence and the data and the spirit, the willingness to embrace change to really lead the world in this electric buildings revolution. The hard part of electrifying buildings, which technology, which hardware should go into which building and why? What size should that technology be? Is it affordable? Is it insured? Is it properly installed? These are all like really difficult questions for most Americans to answer. They're actually difficult questions and many times for construction experts or engineers to answer. You may have an engineer, oh, here's my son. You may have an engineer who is an expert at the heat pump technology, but they may not be an expert at the financing that's needed to finance heat pump technology. Or you may have a construction contractor that you have a great relationship with and you trust, but they don't have the expertise and the know-how on how to install heat pumps. And so they just tell you to get another gas furnace instead of a heat pump. So what you need to do, what we all need to do is combine all of the expertise across engineering, finance, construction, measurement and verification, data analytics into one turnkey, or as you guys say in Silicon Valley, full stack, one full service that makes it easy for families and neighbors and communities to decide to electrify their homes and electrify their schools and their churches and synagogues and mosques and temples, electrify all the buildings and make it simple. So Block Power does that. We answer all of the questions and help to provide information to make accurate decisions on what kind of electrification technology makes sense for what kind of building, how to properly install it, how to insure it, how to maintain it, how to make sure it works. We provide financing and have several $100 million of capital to support that work. And we hope and believe that Menlo Park is going to be the leader on this for a variety of reasons. They've committed to green all of their buildings by 2030, and they have the willingness and the appetite to do it. They are organizing financial resources from the California state government. There is a labor pool issue in that there's not enough skilled electricians and contractors around America to solve this problem. And the solution is workforce development. If we don't have enough trained electricians to go building to building and electrify all the buildings, well, let's create some more electricians. And Menlo Park is doing exactly that. We're working with state senator to fund a workforce development program that's going to train and create a new cohort of skilled contractors that are going to support going neighbor to neighbor and building and electrifying all the buildings and creating the pool of workers that's necessary to really implement this at scale. As Panama said, we don't want to leave communities behind. I'd argue that low-income communities actually need to lead the clean energy revolution. Low-income communities waste more fossil fuels per square foot than average buildings. And low-income communities represent the political constituency that we're going to need to continue to push politicians in the Congress to continue to fund the way that we battle the climate crisis. So we are thrilled to partner with Menlo Park in San Jose and Oakland and Berkeley, in Chicago and Atlanta and New York City and Ithaca and cities across the country who are following you all's lead on electrifying all the buildings. One quick note that I think is really interesting and relevant, that's another area that you guys should consider leading on, is helping to crowdfund resources to electrify low-income communities. There is a new initiative in Menlo Park that's being put together where we've committed to starting by greening building low-income buildings in communities that are financially underserved. And there is a new crowdfunding page where you can donate and invest in helping low-income communities in Bellhaven and other financially underserved parts of Menlo Park to go green, to train workers, to reduce asthma, to remove pollution. And we think it's another brilliant innovation for Menlo Park, and would encourage all of you to consider that as well. So thanks so much. And I am very glad to be here with all of you and look forward to your questions in the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Danelle. Your company is a climate leader that demonstrates a viable path to decarbonization with equity at the forefront, and the co-benefits of Block Power's approach are to be applauded. Our next speaker will show another pioneering approach to existing building decarbonization that is unique, yet replicable. Pat Burt, Palo Alto's outgoing mayor and a current council member, is surely the most climate-conscious mayor Palo Alto has had in recent history. Last October, he led the Palo Alto City Council to pass a groundbreaking climate action plan, which included an ambitious carbon neutral by 2030 goal, building on the city's existing goal of cutting carbon emissions 80% by 2030. The city is also embarking on a program to install heat pump water heaters in 1,000 homes in 2023 under a turnkey system administered by the city's utility. Councilmember Burt will share with us what inspires and motivates him to lead his city to enact courageous climate action, how Palo Alto plans to do its part, and ways that other cities can benefit from the lessons learned and actions taken in Palo Alto. Councilmember Burt, we welcome you to our event and thank you for being here. You're up.
Thank you. Maya, it's a pleasure to be here. And unfortunately, I have a sharp cutoff just before 5:30, so I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. Next slide, please. So we know that the impacts of climate change are not only on the horizon, but they're already with us. And we don't need any greater exhibit than what we've seen in our mega fires and their impacts, as well as accelerating sea level rise. Next, please. So Palo Alto has built on a whole series of measures over the last actually 20 years, leading up to in 2016, we actually achieved the goal we set in 2013 to go to 100% carbon neutral electricity, one of the first cities globally to do so. And we have done that at electricity rates for residences that are 40% below PG&E cost. At the same time, in 2016, we set our 80% carbon reduction goal by 2030 and 100% carbon neutrality now by 2030 as well. Next, please. So we've been ahead of the state on this, but the state of California now has just adopted an 85% carbon reduction by 2045. So we're all moving in the same direction and recognizing that we feed off each other's work, and that the urgency is even greater than when we set these goals. Next, please. So here's where we really are on our emissions reductions. we've brought it down now 50% reduction from our 1990 base level. And so we've made great progress, but a big chunk of that was completing the greening of our entire electricity supply and reduction in solid waste. And as others have talked about, the remainders are in transportation and buildings. Next, please. And here's really the breakdown of that. As others spoke about, we have about 35% of our remaining greenhouse gases are in buildings, industrial, commercial, and residential buildings. Next, please. But I want to touch on the need to really take on that other 60+% that is in transportation. It's multifaceted approach. A lot of that is dependent on EV adoption. Palo Alto's been the highest EV adoption rate in the country for the last number of years. We're up at 30% in 2020 and are looking forward to seeing that accelerating, hopefully even in 2022. But the ways in which the city also can help promote that is to really assure ubiquitous EV charging, commercial areas, on streets, in at businesses where people work, in particular, so that they can be charging during the day when electricity is greenest and cheapest. And then really how we can assure that our utility system has the capacity to accommodate this massive increase in electricity demand as we are moving away from gasoline and natural gas to more than a doubling in electricity demand over the next decade. Next, please. So as I mentioned, we have a doubling approximately in electricity demand. That's from this combination of home EV charging and building electrification. Palo Alto had already mandated a couple of years ago a conversion of all new buildings, commercial and electric, must be commercial and residential, must be electrified. But in this early October, we adopted our next phase of our REACH code, which requires all remodeled buildings to be electrified as well. And we set aggressive standards on what a remodel is. And then the program that I want to go a little deeper on is under our existing home electrification. So retrofitting of existing homes, as others have talked about, we've adopted a first phase that is to take on the highest payback period and the shortest lifespan of a home appliance, which is the hot water heater system. And that program that we've adopted and have launched already is intended to prove out a multifaceted approach on how to move folks to conversion and retrofitting appliances, and do so in a way that we've got the bugs out, so that we don't create a backlash in our community because our execution was too aspirational and we had not really figured out how to make this turnkey and cost effective for residents. So the elements are that it's first, heat pump water heaters have a high return on investment. We mandate this upon end of life, and that is not on what we call burnout, meaning we're going to be identifying homes that are on the cusp of needing to replace these systems in the next couple of years, and then replace them before they burn out. We've adopted a streamlined permitting process, an online 15-minute permitting process that has just rolled out in the last week. And we've contracted with a single turnkey contractor to do this on a single price basis that really makes it as easy as possible on the resident. And then a final component is that we have what's called on-bill financing for anyone who wants to participate in it, meaning that they will only pay the difference in the capital cost between the gas hot water heater that they would have otherwise used for a replacement, and the more expensive heat pump water heater, electric heat pump water heater. But that electric water heater is more efficient and saves them money each month. And so what we do is we're fronting the difference in cost, and then we're having them repay it on a monthly basis on the bill, and it ends up being no net additional cost to them. And then very important is a grassroots program to get this out in the community. And we're partnering with 350.org, and we expect with our Palo Alto Student Climate Coalition to really go and have ambassadors door to door, explaining the advantages, explaining how we will overcome the hurdles and ease this process, and identifying information from them. And then this year, we're also moving forward with developing a similar system for commercial HVAC systems on what are called roof pack systems. Next, please. So we had a number of critical lessons learned. We have to right size these systems. We need to have what are called low watt appliances so that we don't oversize them and trigger transformer upgrades on our utility system, which are a real critical aspect. We are having great difficulty keeping up with the needs for expanded utility capacity, primarily replacing all of our transformers, the pole mounted transformers. And to minimize that, we need to right size the home EV chargers and the home appliances. Next, please. And we have a number of areas that we're trying to make sure that we reach everyone at all income levels. So on the transportation side, we have both federal, state, and emerging local subsidies for EVs, transit passes on a local level, and we're looking at building on a new state program for subsidies for electric bikes for low-income folks. We also just had received a national award for conversion of low-income housing to 100% electrification on a large project that we intend to scale. We now have federal and state subsidies that favor low-income families. And we're now moving on the program to not only electrify the appliances of multi-unit homes, but to hit the very difficult requirement of how do we supply EV charging networks for those homes. Next, please. And so I think a lot of this on the future, we're seeing a great opportunity for two-way EV charging and smart systems in the future. Next, please. And we recognize that we have not only a critical requirement for the electricians, but for the utility workers. And there is a crisis in the availability of high voltage line workers and power supply engineers to be able to double this system capacity. And we're working with state and legislators to put this through as soon as possible. Next, please. And I'm going to have to skip. Next, please. And we have a number of measures beyond these to hit our carbon neutrality. Next, please. And that is how we and others hope to leverage what we're doing with collaboration for others to set the groundwork. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, I have to sign off right now.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Burt. What you and your city are doing is truly exemplary, and we really appreciate the encouragement of other local governments to take similarly bold climate actions. Our next speaker has a very unique perspective with a diverse background as a mayor, an air quality district board member, and currently the leader of one of the Bay Area's not-for-profit community choice aggregation organizations. Jan Pepper has over 30 years of energy and utility experience, with a focus on renewable energy contracting and financing. She joined Peninsula Clean Energy as CEO in May of 2016 as the first employee. Peninsula Clean Energy is the community choice aggregation agency for San Mateo County and the city of Los Baños. Jan has also served as the mayor of Los Altos and had a seat on the board of directors of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District from 2013 to 2017. Jan will discuss the enormous progress that has been made by Peninsula Clean Energy and other CCAs to supply communities with clean energy. And she will highlight the role that CCAs can play going forward in assisting cities and residents and businesses to remove fossil gas from their buildings. Jan, it's a pleasure to have you and a big thanks for being here. It's your turn.
Thank you so much, Maya. And thank you for inviting me here to participate today. And thank you to so many of you who are attending this webinar today. If we can go to the next slide. So I will talk about pathways to healthy electric cities. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as a community choice aggregation agency, we put together a strategic plan, and our vision from our strategic plan is to create a sustainable world with clean energy for everyone. And there are solutions which I will talk about today from the energy sector. These include 100% renewable energy, using this clean energy to power transportation and to power our homes. Next slide, please. So what are CCAs and where are they in the state? So CCAs came about from legislation that was passed in 2002 after the energy crisis, and it allows a public agency to aggregate the electric load within their jurisdiction to select their electricity mix. And currently there are 25 CCAs in California. You can see on the map on the left where PG&E covers and where Southern California Edison covers in California. And then you can see where the CCAs have formed so far in California. We were the 5th CCA that was formed in 2016, and each CCA reflects the choices of their community. Many focus on increasing GHG reductions through clean and renewable energy, others at providing customer rate savings without the use of taxpayer funds or subsidies, which is what all of us do, and also to increase customer choice for energy supply and energy programs. Next slide, please. So for Peninsula Clean Energy, our mission and vision since we started was to provide lower rates and cleaner electricity than PG&E, and we have done that. We started in San Mateo County in 2016, and we expanded to Los Baños in Merced County in 2022. We hope to further expand in Merced County over the next few years. And we are governed by a 23-member board of directors, which consists of a council member from each of the 22 jurisdictions we represent, which are the 20 cities and towns in San Mateo County, the city of Los Baños, and the San Mateo unincorporated San Mateo with representatives from the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors. So how does it work? Next slide, please. So we generate the electricity. We decide on what the sources of that electricity will be. So we're the generation service provider, and that's what shows up on people's bills. PG&E still delivers our electricity over their poles and wires, and then it goes to the customer, which the customers receive savings and they get cleaner electricity. Next slide, please. So since our inception in 2016, we have reduced greenhouse gas emissions in San Mateo County from electricity by 98%. And this has actually been very helpful for cities in achieving their goals on their climate action plans. And because our rates have been 5% below PG&E since the beginning, we have saved our customers over $90 million due to our lower rates. So that's money that stays in people's pockets to spend in the local community rather than going into PG&E's pockets. Next, please. And as Maya noted, I understand what those of you who are on city councils are going through and the demands on your time, because I was on the council in Los Altos from 2012 to 2020 and served as the mayor in 2015 and 2020. And our board members on the Peninsula Clean Energy Board site that's serving on the Peninsula Clean Energy Board is one of the highlights of their time as a council member. So I encourage all of you who have CCAs in your communities to try to serve on the board of the CCA. We love to have people who are engaged and interested. And I have to say that our board is super supportive of what we're doing. And it's a pleasure that we're all kind of trying to do good together. And it makes it a lot of fun to work together. Next slide, please. So the first step is to decarbonize the grid. So we must be using clean electricity as we electrify. And this map shows where all of the projects are that we have contracted for as Peninsula Clean Energy. And we look for diversity in our portfolio. We have projects throughout the state. We have different technologies such as wind and solar and geothermal. We have different size projects. We have different terms of our contracts. Some are short-term, some are long-term. And some of our contracts are with new projects, some are with existing projects. And you can see in this slide, the photo at the upper right-hand side is the Wright Solar Project. It's a new 200 megawatt solar project that we caused to be built. And all of the electricity from that project comes to Peninsula Clean Energy customers. And that's located just outside the city of Los Banos. The second picture down is the Shiloh Wind Project in Solano County. It's an existing wind project for which we get some wind power. And then the bottom picture is a picture of the geysers up in Sonoma and Lake counties, a geothermal project up there. Next slide, please. So our goal is to deliver 100% renewable energy 24 hours of the day to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this is very innovative for the electricity industry. And innovation is also part of what we're all about, being here in Silicon Valley. And when we started, our first goal was to be 50% renewable, or we were 50% renewable, delivering that on day one in 2016, 14 years ahead of California's then requirement to meet that by 2030. And we just published this paper on Tuesday about how we are going to achieve 24/7 renewables by 2025. And we're really pushing the envelope on doing this and helping to spur others. And our modeling work shows that we can do this and that we're going to be able to do it at about the same cost that it's costing now for what we're delivering to our customers. So this is very exciting results. If we want the world overall to embrace renewable energy and sustainability, the cost to do so needs to be the same or less. And that's what we're setting out to do to show that actually is the case. Next slide, please. So the next step is to use this clean electricity and to further reduce emissions from buildings and transportation, to convert those gas cooktops to electric cooktops, to get out of those polluting vehicles into electric vehicles, and to shut down the fossil-based power plants to have renewable power plants. Next slide, please. So one of the areas that we're working on, and which other speakers this evening have already touched on, are city ordinances such as building REACH codes. And the REACH codes involve both installing EV chargers and electrifying appliances in the buildings. And those of you who are council members, you are the ones who will be adopting the building codes for your city. So you have the opportunity to move things along faster by adopting building codes that reach beyond what the state requires, and you can have a huge impact on making change. And we find that if it's in a code and everyone has to do it, then there's going to be much more impact from that, as opposed to relying on voluntary actions by residents and businesses. So the code area is really, really important. Next slide, please. So as CCAs, we've been working on this for the last few years, and the REACH codes cover both EV chargers and electric appliances in the buildings. We provide local jurisdictions with free technical assistance and model building codes that they can adapt to their needs. So about 75% of the cities in San Mateo County have adopted REACH codes that require a certain number of EV chargers to be installed with either new single-family homes and or multifamily homes. And almost all have adopted REACH codes that require electric appliances for new construction for residential and commercial buildings. And we've partnered with some of our sister CCAs, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, which serves Santa Clara County, and East Bay Community Energy, which serves Alameda County. And of those cities that we represent, 39 of the cities that have adopted REACH codes, or 63% of those in the state of California that have adopted them, have been in our three service areas. So we're really leading the state here. And what you can do as council members in 2023 is to readopt the previously passed REACH codes for new construction, and then to strengthen those, consider strengthening those, and also consider adding existing buildings. And in fact, 3 of our jurisdictions, San Mateo, Portola Valley, and Half Moon Bay, have started with the adoption of some existing building codes. And our next speaker, I believe, Rick Bonilla from San Mateo, is going to get into more details as to what they did in San Mateo. So there's a lot that we can do, and it's really exciting. Next slide, please. So we also work with our communities to support them to electrify transportation in other ways besides the REACH codes. So on the transportation side, we provide EV charger incentives. In fact, we're investing $16 million of our own funds and $12 million from the California Energy Commission to reach our goal of 3,500 EV chargers in San Mateo County by 2024. We also provide no-cost technical assistance. If you want EV chargers, please contact us and we'll help you figure out how to get them in and how you can take advantage of the incentives. And just to note that in San Mateo County, 50% of the cars purchased last year were electric vehicles. Not quite as high as Palo Alto, but still a lot. We're also working with public agencies to electrify their fleets because they all have lots of vehicles that they use. We have incentives for just normal people to purchase a used electric vehicle. We provide $1,000 for anyone, or up to $6,000 for an income qualifying resident. We provide e-bike rebates for income qualifying folks of from $800 to $1,000 per bike. And we also have an EV managed charging program, which allows building owners to reduce the need to upgrade their electrical panels by taking into account when the driver needs their car charged. So what it does, it will kind of decide which cars should be charged when to balance out the load on the building. Next slide, please. And then for electrifying buildings, we have a program to install solar plus storage on public buildings. And the first cohort of about 15 projects from 13 of our jurisdictions are moving forward. And we're working on developing our next cohort. So if you work for a public agency and have a public building that you would like us to look at, we will install the system for free. And then you will just pay for the electricity at a rate even lower than the already low Peninsula Clean Energy rate. We also provide free technical assistance for electrifying other buildings. We provide zero interest on-bill financing of up to $10,000 for a 2 to 10 year term, no interest, and anyone can qualify as long as they are current on their last 3 electricity bills. We also have incentives for people to put in heat pump water heaters and heat pump space heating. And then we also have a program to provide free home upgrades for income qualifying residents to do some work on some general improvements on their home, but also to install an electrification measure in the home. And we're also working on providing kind of a one-stop shop for people to be able to figure out, how do I convert to being all electric? Because there's a lot to know. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just point out one local success story, which was an all-electric housing development in South San Francisco. This was a 480 unit market rate housing development, and the developer originally was planning to use gas for water heating and pool heating. And the South San Francisco Council had recently adopted a REACH code, but this project was exempt from the electrification requirement because of when they had put in their application. However, the city delayed the approval of the project and requested that the developer reach out to Peninsula Clean Energy for technical assistance. And our staff held 2 meetings with the developer's team to go through what the technical options were for gas versus electric. The developer ran some numbers on the budget and determined that there was minimal impact to the budget for going all electric. And so they decided to forgo the gas, and the all electric 480 unit housing project was approved by the city council later that year. So it's really exciting to see how we're able to really move the envelope, especially on a big project like this. Next slide, please. So of course, people are questioning, well, can the grid handle an all-electric future? And the grid will get better. There's a parallel path to hardening the grid and starting more of this electrification. The electrification is all not happening overnight, and the grid will get better as more electrification occurs. And this is really PG&E, this is not Peninsula Clean Energy, who needs to work on making the grid more resilient and more reliable. But what we can do and what we have done is we have provided portable batteries and portable solar systems to charge those batteries for some of our medically vulnerable low-income customers who were subject to the PSPS, the public safety power shutoffs, a couple of years ago. And so those customers still have those portable batteries, but we can also work on helping you get microgrids installed, getting batteries along with your solar systems, so that if power goes down, you can still power your building, and also providing local energy storage. And I'm also hopeful that soon we will be able to use electric vehicles, that the technology will be there to allow two-way charging. So if you've got an electric car in your garage or in your driveway, which I do because my garage is full of junk, let's be able to use those cars with all of that battery power that they have in there to power our homes or put more power back on the grid when there's a need. So we're looking forward to that opportunity in the future. So that's it for me, and I'm looking forward to answering questions when we get to the Q&A period for this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan. Your organization is a critical and appreciated piece to this puzzle. And we know local municipalities can continue to benefit from PCE's programs to not only accelerate existing building electrification, but also other areas of greenhouse gas reduction. Our next speaker will share the story of how a Bay Area city enacted the nation's strongest REACH code to date, and how it most likely would not have been possible without the tireless work of local climate advocates and the funding programs put into place by Peninsula Clean Energy. Rick Bonilla is a former mayor and council member for the city of San Mateo. Rick has also served on the city's Public Works Commission and the Planning Commission. Prior to his civic service, Rick spent 20+ years building housing, hospitals, and laboratories as a proud union carpenter, and followed that with 13 years as a field representative and organizer with the Northern Californian Carpenters Regional Council. Rick was also a founder and driving force in the creation of Peninsula Clean Energy and served for 7 years on its board of directors and executive committee. Rick will discuss his insights on the enormous job growth opportunities that come with building electrification, how that workforce should be developed, how the city of San Mateo reached beyond other municipalities on climate action, and why leaders must lead with courage. Former Mayor Bonilla, we welcome you to our event and thank you so much for being here. You're up.
Thank you so much, Maya. That's quite an introduction to live up to. But I'm happy to say that it's all true. And the first thing I want to do is thank everybody for being here tonight for this very informative and much needed webinar. But I want to go back and I want to thank the people who actually made what we did in San Mateo that you've heard so much about. They worked so hard, they cared so much, and they made it all possible. And I think that's really speaks volumes about how the people can drive getting the right things done when they need to be done. It's not all just about our elected representatives or certain opportunities or certain conditions. Quite often we've seen conditions prevail and elected leaders fail to actually take the bull by the horn and take action for a number of different reasons. I'm not begrudging anybody, but I have to say that I'm very proud of what we were able to do in San Mateo with the San Mateo Climate Action Team. Robert Whitehair and Michelle Hudson assembled a group of people who were able to amass enough people to go door to door to numerous homes. They hit, I think, 160 doors. They picked up 460 signatures on a petition through different methods. And at the city council meeting, where we actually made the difference in November, they had 50, well, between, I guess, October and November, they had 50 public speakers speaking to the council in favor of electrifying as much as possible, calling for the full model reach code in existing homes, as well as maintaining what we had already done 3 years earlier, which was electrification of all new construction. Well, that was with exceptions 3 years ago. This time we pretty much eliminated those exceptions, but it's something to be proud of. It's a step that I think has gone beyond what other jurisdictions have been able to do. So I want to make mention of the fact that I am a retired union organizer. And so when I got elected to council, I realized this is a different kind of thing being a politician. I had served already on the Planning Commission, the Public Works Commission, and a huge land use committee for a number of years. But what I found was that organizing is organizing, and it needed to be done there as a city council member on the issues that the people needed to weigh in on. What I find is that quite often justice comes from the people. They realize that there's something that needs to be done, and they will coalesce, they will collaborate, they will form an organization, and they will make it happen. So I'm proud to have been able to be a part of that, but the work isn't finished. I did leave the council at the in December of this year. I had served for 8 years, and people ask me, what are you going to do, Rick? I'm going to do the same things: housing, climate, and transportation. I just don't have to be elected to do that anymore. And I'm going to go at it with full gusto, the way I have always done everything else. So basically, starting 3 years ago at the Blue Sky meeting that San Mateo had, which is in January, it's the meeting that Maya spoke about earlier, that this event is happening ahead of, when councils discuss their priorities for the coming fiscal year, which generally starts in July. This is the time when council members put those ideas out there. The city manager and staff make some comments. The public makes a lot of comments there. And that was also another time when the San Mateo Climate Action Team members weighed in heavily in favor of electrification. But at that point, then staff goes back to their offices and they work out the details about what needs to be done, how long it'll take, what will it cost. They make their best estimates. The people, thank you for changing that slide. That's good. The people, though, put big pressure on the organization, the city of San Mateo, to make that happen. I want to talk a little bit about PCE just for a minute, and then I'm going to come back to a couple of other things. Peninsula Clean Energy, and these are the slides, and I'll talk about these more later, from the San Mateo Climate Action Team. Peninsula Clean Energy is a great passion of mine. Jan mentioned that board members are very proud of and happy with what they're doing there on that board, because there are tangible outcomes that are improvements, that are saving lives, that are improving health, that are saving people money and creating great opportunities for people to have an EV, to have an e-bike, to electrify their home. These are all such great things, and I'm so proud of that. Part of how PCE came about, because it was mentioned, I was kind of one of the founders there, was in 2014, there was legislation, it was AB 2145, written by an assembly member who has spent the previously 10 years working as public relations for Southern California Edison. That bill was intended to kill CCAs, community choice aggregators, and to make existing ones crippled so that they could not expand. That bill was defeated in 2014. And when it was defeated, I, the planning commissioner, went to the Marin Clean Energy Board meeting in San Rafael on a weeknight, where I introduced myself to the CEO, the chair, and their spokesperson. And I asked them to come to San Mateo County, speak with our board of supervisors and our sustainability personnel, and help us get this started. They agreed wholeheartedly. They had been getting beat up by PG&E and some other organizations. They were tired of it. They agreed that it was time to grow the movement. And that's something I'm always working on, is growing the movement. Anyway, that's when it started. And I was there, a member of the original steering committee. I was in the room when we interviewed all the candidates for the CEO, and we decided to hire Jan, which was a great choice. Jan had the right experience. She's done a great job throughout the years. She's a venerable leader, and I appreciate everything that she has done with this organization. I want to talk a little bit. Well, let's go through some of these slides. I want to explain something about how we did this. After the Blue Sky meeting and the staff came back, and we got down, and the council decided that we wanted to move forward with decarbonization of continuing all new construction, but also we told the staff to examine, to explore decarbonizing existing buildings with the goal of eliminating methane gas by 2030. Next slide, please. Next slide. So these are the people, though. They came from all walks of life. They launched in 2021. They're parents, students, retirees, scientists, teachers, attorneys, faith-based leaders, many others, including a union organizer. But the concern was, the next slide, please. This was the concern that brought everybody out of time. What the UN had to say with the IPCC report, I think, from which this webinar got its name, Code Red for Humanity, kind of turned up the heat to say on the urge that people feel to take a determinative action, to exhibit some strength and make a call when there are forces that are actually out there saying, well, this is not real. Oh, we don't have to do this. It'll cost too much. I'll never give up my gas stove. Really? We can't do anything because you'll never give up your gas stove. Well, those calls came and they continue. Those are the popular calls in Congress right now. I'll never give up my gas stove. Next slide, please. So we were looking at what had been done 3 years earlier, new construction. So that we easily decided as a council needed to be continued with a couple of improvements, which included no exceptions for kitchens or commercial buildings without a specific request and a good reason for having an exception. So previously they had just been granted an exception without question. So remodels of existing homes. This is where the city of San Mateo stepped into the existing home. The rule right now is until 2025. It started on January 1st, that upon remodel, upon taking a permit for a remodel, if your remodel affects the water heater or the heat pump or the furnace, then those need to be replaced with electric appliances. Additionally, we cannot extend the gas infrastructure to fireplaces, to backyards, to fire pits, to swimming pools. If it doesn't exist, it can't be extended there. Also, ADUs and JADUs, which had not been previously included, are now included. And this was all effective, like I said, on January 1st. Please, next slide. So here's, and I'm going to talk about transportation, which is the big elephant in the room. But when we look on the right-hand side at commercial built environment, 16%, and residential built environment, 18%, this is 34% of the emissions coming from the city of San Mateo that we're talking about right now here with electrification. This is a critically large portion of emissions that can be eliminated through this kind of smart action through the REACH codes. The REACH codes are critically important to enabling jurisdictions who have the political will to take this on and do it. So next slide, please. This is what we showed everybody, that the water heater on the right-hand side is the biggest contributor to the emissions in your house. So the chart on the left shows all the different gas burning appliances and the car in the garage with the EV charger, all the different ways that we can cut and eliminate emissions, including the car, which is transportation. Next slide, please. So the current REACH codes for new construction, which ran through the end of this year, covered solar. Initially, it was solar readiness. I think at this point, we're requiring some solar on new construction, building electrification on new construction, and EV readiness, which amounted to placing the wires in the walls where they needed to be so that a charger could be mounted. We've gone beyond that. Next slide, please. So we developed these REACH codes for existing buildings in collaboration with PCE, which was the lead agency, and developed the model REACH codes, which were what was issued to cities, the full model REACH code. And that is what we called for, the San Mateo Climate Action Team and me, for the city to pay attention to and take full advantage of and to approve the full model REACH code. There was some resistance, and that's why I mentioned political will. There was some resistance. We did have, for some reason, a lack of information that was presented to the council and to the people. The full model REACH code was not made available. We had to obtain it through other methods, and then that was what the people drove for, was the full model REACH code. We didn't sadly completely achieve the full model REACH code, but we went farther than anybody else did. So the new model REACH code is effective, as you can see, through the end of 2025. It is enforced at the time of pulling a permit, and the focus completely on building electrification. Next slide, please. Here are the 5 major outcomes as a result of what happened at San Mateo's, I believe it was our October 17th meeting. And I'm not going to read all of this. If you want, you can take a screenshot, or you can actually acquire these slides later. I'd be happy to provide them too for anybody who reaches out to me. But the electric readiness in the panel capacity is critical. If you have an old panel that's small and your house is old, you might want to think about having a new panel. How big the panel needs to be is questionable. It could be that a 100-amp panel works just fine for your home, but if you have a larger home and you plan to do full electrification, and depending on the type of appliances that you're intending to use, you may be able to get away with a smaller panel. Personally, I put in a 200-amp panel because I intend to do a lot of electrification and increase the size of my home. So that was my choice. Electric readiness outlets installed. So the kitchen, laundry, renovations, all these outlets have to be put where they need to be. 220 outlets, if that's what's needed, for the cookstop, for the dryer. Heat pump, air conditioning. That was always in the city's plan, was that if an air conditioner is going to be replaced, it should be electric. No new gas infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier. And then this is what was added at the last minute. There was drama at the city council meeting. We were nearing a motion and we were on the cusp of it. And I said, wait a minute, stop. I need to go back. I asked the staff to please reprise the different types of help that were available for people to install a heat pump water heater. I made the point that this was important because that's the largest source of emissions coming from the house. And what we saw was that the council, after hearing again how much rebate and incentive was available and realizing that it was actually almost no additional cost compared to replacing your heat pump, replacing your water heater with a gas fired a water heater. Then two other council members who had not been agreeable to that decided yes, and the motion was made and we approved this reach code, which reaches far into the existing home with requirements that are not common throughout the Bay Area or even the state. Next slide, please. Do we have the next? Okay. So this was our process. It took time, but as of January 1st, 2023, you'll see it was done. Our city ordinance is available. Panama Bartholomy mentioned it earlier. It is available for anybody that would like to see it. I have it. I can forward it to you so that you can look at it and use it as a model ordinance for your city. Next slide, please.
Great, and unfortunately, we are running a bit behind.
Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, we developed a slide for the roadmap to success. I don't see it here. It should have been earlier. It should have been the third slide. I'm sorry that we don't have that. I will see if we can get it added so anybody who requests the slides later will be able to see that, because it describes step by step a plan to get to full decarbonization in your existing home. So I can let this slide go. You can read it. You can obtain the slide later. I want to say the most important thing, though, is that somebody needs to stand up and fight for getting these things done, because this is critically important. This is the existential challenge for the human race today. Our houses are emitting huge amounts, all of our buildings, the way we do business, and transportation. There's a big struggle over the housing element and building new housing in our cities up and down the peninsula because the state is requiring it. New housing will be all electric in most cities. And when people move in there, they'll be able to stop commuting from the valley to the peninsula to work. So it will cut a lot of emissions from commuting, and transportation needs to see its emissions cut. EV adoption is great. I'm happy to hear that in Palo Alto, they have plenty of money and they have 85% adoption of EVs. That's great. In the peninsula, generally, we had 50%, which is amazing. It was an increase over what was 25% last year. So that's the year before. That was great. So thank you all. I just want to say that I have some things to say about labor too, about workforce development. And I think I'm probably out of time, but I'd be happy to take a question on that. If anyone would like to ask that, I would be able to expand. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rick. With your leadership, the City of San Mateo demonstrated last year that cities can and must reach further to enact policies and programs to electrify our existing homes and buildings. We are very grateful to hear the voice of our next and final speaker, who will share her youthful perspective on urgency, advocacy, and possibilities. Anjali Mishra is a sophomore at the Nueva School in San Mateo, California. She is a founder of the San Mateo County Action Team of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action, a nonprofit that develops youth leaders and advocates at the city and state level for strong climate action. She is also an Actera student ambassador and part of the San Mateo County's Office of Sustainability Youth Climate Program. Anjali will discuss her insights on how the climate crisis affects her and her peers, what role her generation has to play in enacting change, and how and why these changes will ultimately benefit each and every one of us. Anjali, we warmly welcome you to our event and look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Maya. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited and honored to be here today among my amazing fellow panelists. Thank you all for attending. Today, I'm going to be talking about youth advocacy as a tool to fight the climate crisis. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about what got me here. I would say, like many youth involved with climate work, that my story begins inside of a classroom. I feel very fortunate to have received an education that valued teaching about climate change. I almost feel like the concept of climate change itself was never specifically taught, but was always lingering in the background in everything we talked about, whether it was in science class or a book we were reading. And especially growing up in California and being around a community that encouraged being outdoors, the natural world was a natural part of my school and my leisure time. Spending time in the outdoors really grew my appreciation for the importance of nature and the tangible threat of climate change. But where does knowing about the climate crisis and even feeling concern shift into taking action? Well, for me, I felt like I didn't really have any other option. Next slide, please. There was a study conducted in 2021 by researchers at the University of Bath that surveyed 10,000 adolescents between the ages of 16 and 25 in 10 different countries to figure out how young people felt about climate change. These are just some of the figures that really stood out to me and I think quite accurately represent the current emotions of youth around the climate crisis. 60% of youth associate negative emotions like fear, anxiety, guilt, and anger with climate change. 45% say that their feelings on climate change adversely impact their day-to-day life, and 60% feel like their government has failed to properly respond to climate change. These figures are precisely what motivate me. I felt and continue to feel a lot of fear and anxiety about the climate crisis, and that people in power aren't doing enough to stop it, and that if I want to have the privilege to live in a clean future, that I'm going to have to work for it myself. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of young people feel. And even though these emotions are coming from a dark place, it provides a lot of really powerful motivation and has allowed youth to accomplish a lot of incredible things. Next slide, please. I would say youth engagement in the climate crisis is not as foreign as it once was, and that we are finally getting a seat at the table. Just last year, in 2022, at the Conference of Parties, for the first time ever, there was a youth pavilion for discussion and collaboration amongst youth advocates. In 2020, the UN created a youth advisory group on climate change. But I think where the impact of youth can be felt the most is at the local scale. As Maya mentioned, I'm a part of a Bay Area nonprofit called Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action, SVYCA, founded in 2019 with city action teams across the peninsula. SVYCA has been really key in passing monumental policy on transportation, electrification, and education. Next slide, please. When I first learned about SVYCA and the really wide impact they had made, I was confused as to how it was possible, because I was always told that voting was the way you could get things done, that I just have to wait it out, wait until I'm 18, and then I can have an impact. But the reality is that youth, even without the ability to vote, can still have such a big impact. And there's a couple ways we can do that. Next slide, please. First is as plain and simple as using your voice. As Mr. Bonilla talked about, San Mateo recently adopted the most progressive reach codes in the country. This was the first big piece of policy that I focused on advocating for. I helped organize other youth to make comments, many not even knowing what a reach code was before talking to them. And I learned that so many were just anxious to jump in and help out in any way that they could. City council meetings were on Monday, and every Saturday I would get a message or two asking if a meeting was happening and if they could help out, or I would mention it in a hallway conversation and a friend would take interest. I also learned that when you show up, the energy changes in the room and people perk up when they hear that I'm in high school, because youth, we shouldn't have to be there. We should be at soccer practice or doing homework. So the fact that we are there means a lot. And for youth, it's a very empowering experience. The first public comment I ever made was on Zoom from a college dorm in New York City. And because of the time zone, it was around 1 a.m. because city council meetings can run late, as I'm sure many of us know. And even though I was physically far away from the place that I was trying to enact change, it was the first time that I felt like I was taking control of my future. Next slide, please. The other biggest strength that I believe youth have to offer is the ability to rally the troops, to inspire and connect with one another. I believe it to be the responsibility of anyone involved in climate action to share their knowledge with others. This can be in many different forms, whether that is holding candidate forums to inform people on their vote, or holding a school assembly on the importance of local government. One of the most gratifying things that I did recently was just last year in 2022 was co-hosting a workshop with Actera to teach other youth about how to make public comments in the height of Reach Code season. Next slide, please. These strategies for youth advocacy have been incredibly successful. On the slide are just some of the accomplishments SVYCA has made in the last few years. Of course, adding the recent San Mateo Reach Codes. Youth action also tends to have this snowballing effect because, as I mentioned, the ability for youth to inspire one another. The youth advocate community does not look the same today as it did in 2019 when SVYCA was founded. And I feel very confident that this list will only continue to grow. But we young people, we cannot do it alone. It is only if those in positions of power listen to us and use the power they've been given to make the change. Next slide, please. So, how can you help? Well, I believe that action can take the form in both habits and policy. I won't go over the policy too much because I think the other speakers have done a wonderful job. Instead, I want to highlight some of the programs and non-policy actions that I think would be very impactful to take, particularly around education and community feedback. When advocating for the San Mateo Reach Codes, one of the things that I did was go door to door with a petition with the San Mateo Climate Action Team, as Mr. Bonilla mentioned. And the most common question we were asked was about cost and feasibility. There was very little pushback on the idea of electrification itself. Instead, the biggest obstacle I observed was confusion about what their options were and the path to electrification. Having informational sessions on the basics of going electric and different financial options would be really helpful to the community. The second habit that I want to recognize is the importance in realizing the context council decisions are in. Climate policy is not passed in a vacuum. They have the potential of influencing other cities to make the same decisions. Especially living in California, we have such wide state support on climate that we should use that privilege to set an example for the rest of the country. Next slide, please. 2022 was a monumental year for building electrification and creating a cleaner future. However, there is still a lot of work to be done. The reality is that new construction is only a small portion of buildings, and the path to electrification for existing buildings is not very clear currently. But instead of making a list of demands of what I think the future should look like, I want to provide some 15-year-old teenage advice for policymakers, advocates, and climate-concerned citizens alike about how we can productively move forward on the climate crisis. Next slide, please. Teenagers have this reputation of being dramatic and stubborn, but I actually think we are much more empathetic and open to different perspectives than some adults. My mentor once explained that passing policy is like a square. It's made up of advocates, staff, policymakers, and voters, and they all need to be in alignment for anything to happen. But the reality is that sometimes one corner of the square might be off, and it's going to require the rest of the square to compromise. But adjusting and getting something done is far better than leaving one corner behind and getting nothing done at all. It might require some collaboration between people that have different perspectives and opinions, but the climate crisis impacts all of us. And regardless if you agree with someone, it's really important to hear what they have to say. Next slide, please. So I encourage you to use your voice, to share your skills. Policymakers, use your power to take action. Help give the youth a future that's not riddled with climate disasters and extinct species, but a world where we can thrive. I want to end with this quote from Greta Thunberg, a youth advocate. Climate change is not only a threat, it is above all an opportunity. I interpret this word opportunity as that we can take action on the climate crisis because yes, we need to save the planet, but in the process, we are creating a cleaner and safer environment for everybody. And I think we would all love that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. As one of your peers, I really appreciate your words, efforts, and hopes, and I look forward to working with you in the future to influence our elected leaders. We are quite short on time as we move into the Q&A section. So first, I wanted to express a huge thank you for all of our speakers. We're so grateful for sharing your insights and knowledge. And as we move into the Q&A portion, we are joined by all council members except all our speakers except Councilmember Burt, who had a previous commitment at this time. We're going to ask that you keep responses short, and we'll move into questions now. All right, our first question is for the panel. Could you explain how and when the IRA funding will roll out and how it will be utilized by cities, counties, individuals for building electrification? And how will funding be prioritized for low-income families?
Sounds, I think, best for Donnell or I to do. Donnell, you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. Lots of IRA funding is available now, specifically in the form of tax credits for solar. There is $27 billion from the EPA that will be focused on electrification and electric vehicle charging, which will roll out this quarter in the next few months. And additional funding streams will start to be released to cities and states, in the next 60 to 90 days. So IRA funding is ramping up. 40% of the funding is supposed to be invested in low and moderate income communities that have been disenfranchised. And so there's a significant amount of money that's coming to your local city, to the state of California. And so you do want to advocate, as Anjali is, to ensure that capital from the IRA is invested in ways that make sense for you and your community.
Awesome. I'll move on to the next question, and this is for Panama. What would you say to city council members and mayors who are being pressured by special interests like fuel cell manufacturers to water down proposed REACH codes to allow the installation of new gas pipelines in new construction so that facilities can use their gas-powered fuel cells? And this question is a bit long, so it's in the chat as well if you'd like to reread.
Great. What I'll say is that in the future, hydrogen is going to have a role to play in the decarbonization of our economy, likely for those end uses that are hard to electrify, like heavy transport, aviation, and the like. It makes absolutely no sense to use hydrogen for something as easy to electrify as my water heater or my furnace or my stove, and to have to build out a new infrastructure in order to be able to do that. And so as city council members look at adopting new policies for building electrification, they're going to be offered a lot of false choices around renewable natural gas, around green propane, around hydrogen fuel cells. And what I would just say is that study after study has shown that building electrification is the most cost-effective way to decarbonize your building stock. And that you should hold firm and avoid the false choices offered to you.
Awesome, thank you. And then a question for Jan. What role can CCAs play in educating the public and helping folks understand how the benefits of electrification allow for a positive view of our future?
Thank you. That's a very broad question. We have a lot of information on our website, so I'll encourage people to go there and read what we have there. We also work with youth. We have a program called our Youth Climate Ambassadors, where we work with high school students from the county, and they each do a project on an environmental subject or an energy-related subject. And certainly educating the youth helps to educate their parents. And so we encourage students to get involved with that.
Great. And then a question for Rick Bonilla. Can you share your thoughts about how good housing policy is good climate policy?
Yeah, certainly. I started to talk about that. So thank you for asking that. There seems to be a lot of resistance on the peninsula to the REACH codes, which have been put forth by the State Housing and Community Development Department, which call for 441,000 units to be planned for throughout the 9-county Bay Area. Lots of resistance has come from cities on the peninsula to complying with the allocation that was sent to their particular jurisdiction. In San Mateo, our allocation was zoning for and creating positive incentivizing land use settings for 7,080 new units in San Mateo. We have already, I believe, 38,000. So this would be a significant increase. But the thing is, we're planning in our general plan to put new housing along the railroad tracks, at the stations, along El Camino, where mass transit exists, in taller and denser buildings. New buildings, like I said, will be all electric. And that means people who have been commuting long distances also we have to, about half of the housing we build has to be affordable according to the requirements from the Housing and Community Development. So that would put people close to where they live, close to a train line, and reduce huge amounts of emissions. Housing is key to cutting emissions. Thank you.
Great. And then a question for Danelle. How do we incentivize landlords to invest in their rental properties?
We need to help clarify for landlords that they are entitled to tax credits from the IRA, so there's economic benefits to them for investing in their properties. We also need to have financial structures to share the profits and increase efficiencies that result from electrification with landlords. And so if you put a bunch of heat pumps in an apartment building and you save all the renters money on their energy bills, you also want to share some of those energy bill savings with the landlord. And we need to help landlords understand that when they green their building increases in value. So there's a range of benefits that can be generated for landlords, and communicating with them transparently about the financial benefits of greening the buildings. Black Power has greened, several hundred apartment buildings in New York, and are confident that landlords, if you take the time to explain to them the impact on their building, can be persuaded to do retrofits.
Great. Thank you. And our final question for today is for Anjali. What are your suggestions to help young people get more involved in climate advocacy around the Bay Area?
Thank you so much for that question. For me, it was really as simple as sending an email to someone, which I know that is not the experience for everyone, but I would say genuinely, just reach out to people that you know that are involved, whether it's someone who works for a company like PCE or a friend's sibling that has done climate work in the past, because everyone here is very interconnected. All of the people that work at these different nonprofits, everyone kind of knows each other. And so I think getting to know one of those people is definitely a great way to get involved, because they can reach out to a bunch of different people. And there are also a lot of really great programs like the one that Jan mentioned with YCA in collaboration with the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability. Actera has an internship program as well. And so looking for those kind of opportunities at nonprofits, and maybe your school has something like that too, are really great places to start.
Great. Thank you so much. That concludes our Q&A time for today. And another huge thank you to all our speakers who have volunteered their time in speaking today. The challenge that lies ahead is enormous, but our resilience and ingenuity and our love of life on this planet will propel us. Thank you also to everyone who took the time to attend today, our co-sponsors, and the many volunteers involved in the planning. As a reminder, in the post-event email, you will receive a registration link for the January 21st workshops, which aims to build off of topics explored today in an interactive setting, perfect for public officials, experienced climate activists, and anyone looking to get involved. As we get ready to close out this event, we'd love to hear your feedback, so please complete this last 2-minute quick survey now. The link will be placed in the chat. And lastly, Actera has several other events coming up that we invite you to attend. See actera.org for more information and subscribe to get informed of future Actera events, and see the chat for the link as well. Watch your email for links to videos, resources, next events, and actions you can take. Thank you all again for being here, and stay healthy, safe, and dry.